Welcome, everybody, and good evening. My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm the founder of the Parent Education Series and co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We could not be more delighted to have David Kleeman with us today, and I mean that literally. David truly is an international expert in children's and youth media, and we have been trying to track him down for almost a decade, but he's a very busy guy. He's landed long enough during the pandemic for us to have him tonight. So thank you, David. This is really a big deal. And he's here courtesy of Alice Kleeman, who turns out to be his big sister. Many of you will know Alice as the former college advisor from Menlo Atherton High School, and Alice will be telling us a little bit about her little brother in a few minutes. First of all, I wanted to tell you a bit about how tonight's program is going to go. And before I begin, if you need Spanish interpretation, we have with us Cynthia Hinestrosa, who will be interpreting tonight's event. You can click on the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and then click on Spanish to hear a Spanish interpretation, okay? All right, first of all, I want to say this is an incredibly timely and important topic, really could not be more timely. With almost 400 attendees registered tonight, we know how important it is, and you're all in for a real treat. Again, this event is sponsored by Menlo Atherton's PTA, the Sequoia Union High School District, the Sequoia Healthcare District, and the Peninsula Healthcare District in partnership with the Parent Venture. So again, thank you to all of our sponsors. We would not be here without you. A special thanks to Alice Kleeman, who is a longtime friend of the Parent Education Series, very instrumental in the launching of this program more than 15 years ago at Menlo Atherton. So thank you, Alice. So great to have you with us tonight. So we're going to begin with about 45 minutes of content from David Kleeman, and then we will welcome you, the audience, to ask questions. We really want to hear from you tonight. In the chat, which is monitored by my Parent Venture partner, Bev Hartman, you'll be seeing links that are relevant to tonight's program. Feel free to chat with each other, to send comments to us, the panelists. Tonight, we would like you to put your questions in the Q&A button. So that's separate. If you're used to meetings, you may just know about the chat, but there is a Q&A button. We ask that you keep your questions kind of short because we'd like to get to as many of them as we can tonight. So chat and comments in the chat button, questions in the Q&A button. We also will have a link to a very short survey that we hope you will take at the end of the evening. We promise we read every one, and your comments are very important to us, both in planning for next year and helping us to evaluate our programming. A video recording of this event will be available on our video library. We really hope you will take advantage of it. It is free, available to all. We have almost 70 videos on topics from parent-child communication to social justice, college admission, and more. So YouTube channel, our video library, you literally Google my name, Charlene Margot, and Parent Education Series. All righty, I think that, one last comment. Our next event is next week on Wednesday, February 3rd, The Power of Belief, Promoting Equity for All Students, to be presented by the National Urban Alliance for Effective Education based in New York. That's an event sponsored by the Redwood City School District. And now I give to you, Alice Kleeman, former college advisor at MA. Take it away, Alice.
Thank you so much, Charlene. And I just am such a fan of the Parent Education Series. I'm not sure there's anywhere else in the country where people can have access free, but we love the donations, I know they do, to such amazing content. Well, I have known David Kleeman since, well, the day he was born. He was pretty interesting then, and I think you'll find him pretty interesting now. I could tell you how he manipulated his 3 older sisters by holding Sister of the Week competitions that had all 3 of us catering, well, pandering to his whims. But instead, I'll tell you a little about his history in the media field from his early days of watching Lunch with Casey up to today, when his grown daughters knew that the ideal Christmas present for David was a 1,300-piece Lego Sesame Street kit. David's early television memories do begin with Lunch with Casey, a local kids show in Minneapolis where we grew up. Casey and Roundhouse Rodney introduced cartoons, performed skits, and sold products until host selling, which is like pushing milk on innocent children, was banned by the FCC. In high school, David was a Star Trek fanatic, and he maintains his Trekkie love for the original series. The early roots of David's career began in high school when he took an education class that allowed him to teach in the school's kindergarten. He promptly decided that he would become a preschool teacher, which was an odd choice at the time because in the 70s, not too many men became preschool teachers. And at Harvard, where David was headed as an undergrad, was not exactly an incubator for early childhood educators. In his first semester there at Harvard, David heard a lecture by Gerald Lesser, who was one of the creators of Sesame Street. And just in the space of that lecture, he decided that his career would involve teaching through television. Lesser welcomed David into ed school courses and served as his mentor. David's favorite course was a practicum in children's program design, which launched his career and even helped develop the TV program 321 Contact. Though he might have become a children's TV producer, he took another route, finding a unique role at the hub of education, research, child development, production, distribution, and digital formats. David connects people and ideas worldwide. Today, David and I share a mutual addiction to MSNBC, a media experience that bears little resemblance to Lunch with Casey. The pandemic has kept him from the insane travel schedule that had him flying more than 200,000 miles per year, traveling from Phnom Penh to Abu Dhabi to Sao Paulo to Bogota to Warsaw, and that was all in 2019, sharing his thoughts on children's media. David's expertise in children's television has, of course, expanded to the full range of children's media. Today, we'll hear some thoughts from David about kids, media, and the impact of COVID on both. Welcome, David, my little brother.
Thank you so much. It's always a little bit dangerous to let your sister introduce you. Fortunately, I had seen a preview of this, so I didn't have to worry too much about what she was going to say. But this is the first time I think that we've had a chance to work together, and maybe from here we go on to become the next Wojcicki siblings. Who knows? Let me share my screen so that we can get started with the presentation. And there we go. Is it not up? Hold on. You don't want to rely on me for the technology then. Very good. So we're going to be talking about kids media and COVID-19, what we've seen over the last year, what we think is what has changed, what hasn't changed, what we think is going to change coming up. As Alice said, I've been in the media business for a long time, since not quite the days before television, when all we had to look at was a wall. But when I got into this business, this is what a television looked like. That was a smartphone. Some of you may not even recognize what that is, but a multi-line touch-tone phone. And a tablet is what you saw on the right there. Alice mentioned that I sort of sit at the hub of many things, and it is a unique role that I play in the industry, and that I'm not a content creator, I'm not a distributor, I'm something of a researcher, but it was all put together by a number of different positions over the years. So working for 5.5 years at PBS to understand how a network works, how television gets distributed to our homes, and then running the American Center for Children in Media, which was a creative professional development center to help us understand what we mean when we talk about excellence in children's media. We brought people together in seminars, workshops, screenings, whatever we could do to get people into a room to talk about what we know about child development, child health, and media. When that closed down, when I closed that down, I moved on to a research company, and that is where I am now, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in just a minute, and that's Dubit. But in some ways, my work is equally informed by a range of things that I do outside the scope of my daily work. So the Prix Jeunesse International is the worldwide children's television festival, and I chair their advisory board. What that means is primarily that every 2 years, I get to see hundreds of children's television programs from all over the world. And it gives me a very strong sense of how culture and media intersect, why things look the way they do in different places, why you're allowed to do certain things in some places and not in others, how parents react to different media that their children consume. So that's a huge influence on my work. I was a senior fellow of the Fred Rogers Center, which is the center that carries on the legacy of Fred Rogers' work. And while there as a senior fellow, I did some work on sort of trying to understand the elements of excellence in today's interactive world. And then finally, I've actually just termed out from the board of the National Association for Media Literacy Education. So I have a very strong interest in lifelong media education, in the idea that we need to read media in the same way that we teach children to read text, that we consume things in so many different ways now that we need to treat them as equally equal partners in how we gain information. So those are some of the background things. Dubit, as I mentioned, where I work now, I've been there about 5 years. It's an interesting company in that it's a two-part company. We are a research and strategy consultancy and also a digital studio. So we not only do studies of how kids are using media, both for our own information and for clients, but we build games, apps, educational technology, virtual worlds, AI, VR, AR, and because we have that research side, we're able to, whenever we're building something, go back and forth between the research and the building. So our engineers actually can watch children playing with the things that they're developing and make sure that they're remaining on target. So that's a little bit of the background of what I bring to the screen tonight. I'm going to start with three things that I often do start with as kind of three stipulations, three things that I hope we can agree to going into this, because it will influence how we look at some of the statistics we're seeing and how we look at some of the effects that we're seeing, especially during the time of COVID. The first is child development doesn't change, the context does. That's more or less straight out of Piaget, that we go through the same stages and phases that we children always have, but the context changes substantially. And one of my favorite ways of demonstrating that, well, actually, first, let me say that this is important in the media field, because we look at this quote from Jeff Bezos, who says people are always asking him what's going to change, but almost never asks him what isn't going to change. And it's much more important when we're working with a client, when we're working with someone developing a game or an app for kids, not to think about, okay, what's the newest fad? What's the hot technology right now? But to think about, how do children play? How do they grow? How do they learn? How do we get at those essential play patterns that they've done forever? So looking at what doesn't change is just as important, if not more so, as looking at what does. So this is the slide I was talking about how I like to demonstrate how context changes, but child development doesn't. All these toys are meant to do exactly the same thing. They are meant to allow the child to replicate what they see the adults in their lives doing, talking on the phone. The toy in the upper left is the one that I had when I was little, a little rotary dial telephone that you'd pull around behind you. And we come all the way to the smartwatch now. None of them does anything. None of them has any technology embedded in it, but they're all meant to say that this imitation pattern that kids want to do of replicating what they see the adults in their lives doing is an eternal play pattern. Second stipulation, screen time is a meaningless concept. And this one may be a little more controversial, but you'll see the direction that I'm going with this. First of all, Alice will remember that when I was little, my grandmother had an apartment on the east side of New York overlooking the East River. I used to sit in her window for hours at a time, just watching the boats go by. And nobody ever said, I'm worried about David. He's getting a little too much window time. Other kids love to read, and nobody says, are they getting too much paper time? So today, screens bring almost everything into our homes: entertainment, learning, pursuit of passions, exploration, discovery, um, communication, socializing. And this is all the more true during this time of COVID, that they represent a lifeline to a lot of different aspects of kids' lives. So measuring screen time doesn't really make any sense with a stopwatch. The other thing is that we've seen more and more in recent years that people who are making content for media are not using the screen as the destination, but they're using it as a window, a way to get further on. If you've seen augmented reality, you know that the smartphone turns into an actual window that allows you to superimpose other things on the world in front of you. Or if you're using it as virtual reality, you are going into a new space. If kids are playing in Roblox, if they're playing in Minecraft, they're going into a new space that goes well beyond the surface of the screen. So those are the reasons why I think screen time doesn't really make sense. I'm going to put in the same category as that the idea that kids are addicted to screens. And I think there are a number of reasons why that model doesn't work, and why the use of the term addiction, even in if you're not meaning it literally, but meaning it more metaphorically, I think is really kind of a dangerous term to use. In a lot of places around the world, the idea that children are addicted to screens is used to control youth, to take away the devices from them, or even in some cases put them into programs to break them of the habit of using screens. It's an economic question as well. You read a lot about families that say, oh, we don't allow our children to have any screens, and we send them to schools where screens aren't allowed and things like that. A lot of those families are of a privileged class where if their kids need to learn about how to use technology, they have all the resources they need readily at their disposal. And a parent can decide at any time, okay, now is the moment where I want to invest in a program, a tutor, or whatever it is to help my child use screens wisely. For a lot of kids, that's not an option. The screen may be their only connection right now, in particular, to how they get their learning from school, to their virtual learning. If all you have in the home is a smartphone and a limited data package, then it's a very different situation from a family that's got high-speed Wi-Fi and all the different devices. So to say that using screens often is an addiction is a kind of privileged position. Individual, I have the name Schramm there. Wilbur Schramm was one of the earliest analysts of educational media, and he would say that television, because that's the time he was in, affects different kids differently. For most kids, most of the time, there is no problem with the way in which they were using television. For some children, some of the time, there does get to be a problem. And so we can't use the term addiction because it's sort of a broad brush, whereas kids come to technology with very different needs and interests and abilities. Causal is when we talk about children being addicted to technology, are we actually talking about something that's covering something else? Are we talking about depression in the child, which is expressed by the fact that the child finds it easier to retreat into spending time with media than they do to be out relating to other children? So, which direction does the causality go? Hypothetical. I've seen so many studies that interview kids and say, do you feel addicted to your devices? Well, if somebody gives you that as the option, you're more than likely to say yes. So it's very easy to get that answer to. And similarly, confirmation bias. So many of the reports about media addiction are published by people who run addiction centers. Well, they've got a very strong financial interest in calling it an addiction because that's something that you can treat as and finally, semantic. I think this is why I feel like it's dangerous to use it even in a use the term in a very casual way. The press likes to talk about media addiction in a way that's it's very much clickbait. It gets you to read the article. Oh, is this a problem for my child? It provokes anxiety among parents, and it normalizes the term. And I think in a lot of ways, avoids the real questions of how to look at children's media use. And finally, in terms of how you treat it, there's no cold turkey for technology. If you have a problem with smoking, the only trick, the only solution is not to smoke. Whereas media are so embedded in our lives that we can't really use that right now. We can't say, well, you're going to have to drop all use of media. Third stipulation, in place of the term screen time, I like the terms content and context and connection. Content, context, and the needs of the individual child were first, to my mind, put forward by a woman named Lisa Guernsey in a book that was first called Into the Minds of Babes. Now they've retitled the second printing of it Screen Time, which unfortunately, I don't like that term, but I love the book. And I would add to that, especially during this time, connection, that you have to look at what the child is doing, why they're doing it, where they're doing it, when they're doing it, what the context is, and then how are they using it to connect either with other children or with other resources. So this, in terms of content and context, this is my favorite little kids media Rorschach. This is the kind of picture that people love to use when they're talking about problems with screen time. The dark room, the child lit up by the glow of the screen, looking like they are all alone in the room and engrossed in the screen. We think of that as, oh, there may be a problem here. This is, the child is too much into the screen. What if I substitute it with this picture? A child who loves to read and crawls under the covers at night and can't break away from the book, so they turn on their flashlight and they read under the covers. Very similar images, but we approach them very differently in terms of kind of a Rorschach test. So let's move on to talking about kids and media and COVID-19. And I'm going to use, to start with, the current meme of how it started, how it's going. Here's how it started. In our first study of kids and media after the onset of lockdowns for COVID-19, we heard this from a teenager who said, I finished YouTube. When does the next season start? The idea they had been through everything they wanted to watch and they had hit just the saturation point of, okay, I'm done, I'm bored. Now, about a year later, so here we're focused on the kid who has just had their world turned upside down, and they're really trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with all this changed world? What am I going to do without my friends? What am I going to do without my school? And to start with, consumes everything available to them. We're about a year into it now, and this is how it's going. Really, the emphasis has shifted over to the parents and to the innumerable articles. I think all of these came from just the last week about the meaning of kids' use of screens during this time. The New York Times saying it's alarming parents, and at the same time, another story saying, well, it's really okay to let them play, and someone saying play with your kids, and someone saying concerns for children. And parents are stuck in the middle of this and trying to figure out, okay, what is it that I should be taking in from this? And I hope that I can help you out with that a little tonight. And I'm going to start with probably my broadest bit of advice, which is don't let anyone play on your guilt. And I use that in both directions. There are a lot of companies that want you to believe if your child is not using our platform, our software, our app, our game at this particular age, they're going to fall behind. There goes their whole career if they're not using this to learn at this particular time. We've got the best solution for you. That's playing on your guilt. Oh, if I don't get it for them, am I damaging the child? At the same time, you've got the people who say if your child comes within the glow of a screen before the age of 2, or if your child is spending too much time with media, that's going to be damaging to them. So much depends on your individual child, on the content, the context, and the connections. Do not let anyone use guilt to tell you the role that media should play in your lives. So I mentioned that Dubit is a research company. We do Dubit Trends is our twice yearly survey, big survey, 2,000 kids in the US each 6 months, so 4,000 per year. Field work in the spring and in the fall. We study the US and the UK every 6 months, and the other countries that you see on the map we visit roughly once a year, a little less often in the case of some where things don't change quite as quickly. We study kids 2 to 18. It's an online survey, so acknowledging that if families don't have access to the internet, we're probably not recording them. But within the families that we do record, we are looking very much at gender splits, at age splits, at socioeconomic, at race, and so forth. So we're really trying to understand the complex world of what devices kids have access to, how they use them, when they use them, where they use them, what their favorite things are at the moment. We ask a lot of open-ended questions about their media use, so that instead of telling them, here's a list of 100 TV shows we know, which ones do you know, that all that says is whether we're good at what we know. So we ask them instead, what are your 3 favorite TV shows? What are your 3 favorite games? What are your 3 favorite apps? What are your 3 favorite books? So that we really get a sense of what's important in their lives at the moment. So this is from our October field work, the slides I'm going to show you. Sometimes I am comparing it to a year previous, to October 2019, just to give you a good sense of how the pandemic has really influenced what they're doing and how much of it they're doing. Not surprising at all that screen time, and again, this is a proper use of the term, because it really is a literal measurement of how much time they are spending on these devices with screens without looking at the content at all. Screen time has risen by quite a bit during the pandemic, and almost every device is up. Smartphone and tablets, surprisingly, maybe not quite up as much as some of the other, as television and PC laptop, but we'll address that as we talk about what they're doing on them. And I think you'll see that it makes sense that the television and the PC have increased the most. What do they do on those devices? Well, the top 3 activities on a television are subscription services. Kids, you've I'm sure heard this over and over. Kids are shifting away from the linear television broadcasters. They are spending their time much more with the streaming services. We find that families have a lot of families now have multiple streaming services. So they are spending their time there, but they do still watch the linear channels. That is their second most popular use, and they're now watching YouTube quite a bit on the big television. I think, if you think about the reasons that they watch YouTube, much of their use when they are using it on a smartphone or a tablet is because it's things that are personal to them, things that they want to keep for themselves. But when they watch it on the big television, it's really because they want to share it with the rest of the family. And we are seeing a lot more family use of media. On a tablet, they're playing games, they're watching YouTube, they're watching video. These are not changed from what they were doing before. On a smartphone, the one really interesting thing that I see that I believe that has changed is the use of smartphones for photography. It's something that doesn't get talked about much, that kids, and we see them getting smartphones at younger and younger ages, want to document their lives. They want to do it for themselves. Sometimes they are sharing it on social media, but for a lot of kids, it's just sharing it with their friends, and it's just documenting what they are doing. And on a laptop, you'll see in just a minute, laptops have come out of the closet. They were put away for a long time. We were seeing laptops drop year on year for the last several years, and all of a sudden they've jumped up again. And that really has to do with the idea that they're going to school at home, they're doing homework at home, and the laptop is often the most useful device for that. Television time, as I said, is up substantially, 25 minutes per week. And the shift in that is primarily that they are plugging other things into the TV. As televisions become smart, they're using it much more to plug in the game console, to download movies, to watch DVDs for families that still are using DVDs. That's been the biggest rise. And I think that may have something to do with the fact that They are using a lot, they were already using a lot of streaming video, already watching a lot of linear TV. And as they're looking for new things to do throughout the pandemic, they were starting to go back to other things that they did more. Oh, we've got those DVDs. I think I'm going to plug it in and see something I haven't watched for a while. You know, playing games with siblings. On a tablet, surprisingly, games and videos have actually dropped a little bit in what we see kids doing with it, as we've seen homework and learning apps rise. The tablet has traditionally been the device that you use up until you're about age 6 or 7, and then you put it away, or you give it to a younger sibling. It's the baby thing that you used before you had access to a smartphone. With learning at home, we've seen older kids reclaiming the tablet, and you'll see in just a minute that use among very young children has actually dropped, probably because they're having to pass it along to the older sibling in order to do their homework or do their learning at home. Smartphone up 4% year on year. It was already, among kids who have access to a smartphone, it was already such a saturating thing that there was not a lot of room for increase in time used. If any of you who get your weekly update on how much time you've spent on your smartphone probably know that there's not a lot of range there. We use a little more some weeks, a little less some weeks, but we use it a lot. And then PC laptop, as I said, it's come out of the mothballs, and so everything has gone up. It's not a particularly friendly device for younger kids in particular. The idea of using a mouse or using a trackpad is not so easy for young hands and young brains as the touch screen that is much more intuitive for them. But for older kids, it really is the probably easiest device to use, or the most powerful device to use for doing their homework. It's the one that they're going to be using most often to connect via Zoom to their schools or connect via whatever communication medium they're using. All this was driven by formal and informal learning as kids were spending time at home. And I mentioned before, you can see that the pink bar on the bars on the left, October 2019 to October 2020 tablet use, the pink bars dropped actually. And that's the youngest children, the 2 to 4 year olds, who probably had to turn over their tablets to their older siblings, because at every other age, tablet use in terms of time per week has gone up year on year. And the PC laptop, every age group. You know, the younger kids are not using it that much more because they're probably not doing the same kind of remote school work that requires a laptop, but they are using it more. All this leads me to a term or a phrase that we've been talking about a lot, which is down in the corner is now up on the server. As kids had this moment that I talked about earlier of, what am I going to do when I can't go to school? What am I going to do when I can't be with my friends? What am I going to do when I can't do play sport, do the things that I've usually done? They've converted their lives from the physical to the digital. Virtually every aspect of their lives that they would have done in a physical space has now an analog where they are an analogous space, I should say, not an analog, where they can do this in virtual. And I'm sure you as parents have seen virtually everything on this page. They're gaming, and I'll talk about Fortnite, Roblox, and Minecraft in just a minute. They're gaming on all these sites. They're socializing on sites that were never meant for kids under the age of 13, at least. Discord is not a place where you necessarily want your kids who are under 13. Zoom was never created as a place for children, but they are finding ways to make it their own, finding ways to use it for socializing. Fortnite, just before the pandemic, created Fortnite Creative, where instead of playing the battle royale game where you're shooting and that, you create an island and you can invite your friends over to your island. So kids are inviting their friends over to come and join them on their island and just hang out. I love the idea that Roblox has started celebrating birthday parties, that you can go and play with your friends in some of the games and then meet up in a kind of side room or a social space for the party element. If you've been following Fortnite, Minecraft, and Roblox events, they are putting on these massive concerts. Millions and millions of people are tuning in to watch some of the biggest names in music perform inside this virtual world. So there's no limit to how many people can be there. There's no COVID worries because you're in a virtual space. It's something that I think we should be watching and will continue, that's going to continue over time. Watching on Twitch, a lot of parents ask me, what is the attraction of watching someone else play a video game? How many of us watch those programs where they rebuild a house, where they do renovations? Or how many of us watch the cooking shows? The idea of watching someone who's really good at something do what they're really good at is a very powerful form of entertainment. So that kind of explains Twitch. Explore, this is one of my favorite examples. Assassin's Creed is a fairly violent video game, but it takes place in historical and geographical settings. And they actually went back and created a discovery tour where, kind of like Fortnite Creative, you're not shooting, there's no violent action to it. You're just touring the space and getting information about the places where these things take place. Create is really important. This goes back to my media literacy side. We often think of media as purely consumption platforms. Using them as creative space is remarkable. And if you have been on Roblox, I'll talk about Roblox in just a second. The number of games created by children under the age of 13, millions and millions of games that they've created. And the TikTok phenomenon. We need to get up, we need to move. TikTok's used for a lot of things beyond this, but it's really changed the way kids listen to music. It's changed the way they dance. It's changed the way they kind of celebrate. The big three of these, and I'm sure you've seen it in your own home, Roblox, Minecraft, and Fortnite. And I won't spend a lot of time on this slide because I'm already kind of running over, but the idea that 55% of kids 9 to 12 have played Roblox in the last 7 days in the US, and almost as many have played in Fortnite in the last 7 days. Many of those are daily. They are in there every day. The degree to which you've seen these things grow from October 19 to October 20 is quite remarkable. As you can see, almost 50% in some cases. And then mentioning the other platforms, I really want to be clear that a lot of these platforms are 13 plus platforms. Some of them are even 16 plus platforms. And today is actually Data Privacy Day. And I was on a panel earlier today talking about how do we stop putting parents in the position of having to lie to their kids, or not lie to their kids, but lie for their kids to get them onto platforms that they want to be on, the social media platforms, the gaming platforms, where they are not supposed to be. We really need to rethink how we're doing data privacy and data and online safety. So why are social games having this moment? As I said, it's down in the corner, is up on the server. And the social games in particular, Roblox, Fortnite, Minecraft, have things that are so elemental to what people want to do. I can play with my best friend in these games, or I can play with kids from all around the world. I can play in a mass stadium of gamers. I can hang out and just be with my friends and not even play the game, just spend some time together in our avatar, with our avatars, chatting to each other. I can watch TV. There are now apps so that I can watch TV or movies with my friends at the same time. But that's really a quieter activity. If I want to spend some time talking, then we're going to go into a game. And as a parent, if you listen to your kids playing these games, they may start talking about the game, but they'll very quickly start talking about everything in their lives. It's kind of the equivalent of when the kids are in the back seat of the car and don't remember that you're there, and they start talking and talk about everything. I win, we win. You can be very competitive in these games, and a lot of people really are in it to try to win. But also, this is a generation that is much more interested in collaboration. We're kind of surprised to see that they don't really always want to compete. They really would rather see a situation where they can help their friends win as well. We developed a game for PBS Kids called Cart Kingdom that's actually just gone off their site. But part of the game was nobody wins until everybody wins. And that was based on the research that we were doing that saw that kids wanted that kind of situation. They're learning strategies that they can use in the real world in some cases. And also in this time where they are really kind of fed up in a lot of ways with the reality around them, where they are anxious and worried about the reality around them, they can escape to a world where none of that is taking place, where they can just remove themselves for a time from their anxieties. We've been looking in particular at Roblox, and there's actually a report about Roblox on the Dubit website that goes very deeply into it. But it is a perfect example of why it took off during the pandemic. It was already a massive community. We actually had to update the report that we created about 6 weeks after we created it because the monthly active users had grown so much. If you're not familiar with Roblox, and your kids are players, ask them to take you on a little tour. It's not a game. It is the YouTube of games. Anyone can create a game for Roblox. The tools are very easy for creating. And you can put your game up, you can share it just with your best friend, or you can share it out to the world. It's not an age-gated platform, so we're seeing fairly young kids coming to Roblox, and in fact play peaks between 8 and 10, but it's a very powerful platform and very unusual in that it does hold on to kids' play until their teenage years. And the other thing is their favorite brands, kids' favorite brands, are on Roblox, whether the brand knows it or not. There are something like 2,500 Lego games on Roblox, none of them created by the Lego company, all created by fans of Lego as user-generated games. So this is why Roblox is such a powerful thing for that you're seeing for your kids. So where do we go next? We asked alongside these questions about the quantitative work, we asked, what's worrying kids? We asked them directly, what are you anxious about? I don't think you'll be at all surprised by what they see here. They're anxious that somebody in their family is going to be seriously ill. They are really missing time with their friends, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. They're worried that they're not going to be going back to school, or how the time they missed is going to affect their learning in the long run. They've already got kind of the long view about this, and they're worried that things will never quite go back to the way that they were before. Older kids, that long view as well. Are my grades going to suffer, and what is that going to mean as I get older and start looking at colleges and so forth? And the older kids have picked up on the conversations in their homes sometimes about parents losing their jobs, about the impact on family finances of whether it's work from home or losing a job, or the risk that you take if you are working in a frontline position. This just came up today. I just added this slide today. I was fascinated by it. It does express a certain amount of privilege, but I was really interested. This is a teacher in Ontario in Canada who asked her kids about how they were feeling during the pandemic. And she found a very different response from what she was expecting. She found that a lot of them were saying, I was so overwhelmed. I was so stressed before. I'm really kind of enjoying this time when I can't do all the after school activities and I have to just sit back and be with myself. They discovered that it's okay to be bored, and actually it's making them be more creative. They're finding their voice. This is a very much a time of activism, and they're finding they have the time and the tools to get involved in online activism. And finally, they're saying they don't feel that disconnected for all the reasons that we've just been talking about. They do have access to all the devices or all the platforms that let them stay connected, not in person, but virtually. They think the world looks a little bit brighter, although they do have some caveats. They anticipate that within the next year, they are going to be back to a lot of the things that they love to do, whether it's playing outside. They anticipate that some of the things that happened during the pandemic will stick around. And we hear this both from parents and from kids. I like having family dinners together. I like that we watch TV together. I like that we go out for walks and bike rides. We've heard for years parents saying the most important thing to me is I'd like to have more time with my kids, kids saying I'd like to have more time with my parents. And it just never seemed to happen until the pandemic, when they were compelled to spend time together and suddenly realized, why didn't we do this before? Let's keep this. When the pandemic is over, let's keep this. They do anticipate they are done with Zoom. So they are anticipate and are hopeful that after the pandemic, there will be less video calling. And not surprisingly, I suppose, older kids more than younger kids are more downbeat that things will ever return to normal. I think they have a broader sense of what normal was, probably a wider scope of what they were able to do, bigger friend groups. So they see the risk that things may never go back to the way that they were before. The long-term winners in our mind, we do a lot of consulting with companies, and they ask us, what do we do to help ourselves as we come out of the pandemic? If you are paying attention to families at home, if you are giving them things to entertain the whole family, or if you are giving them inexpensive or free ways to be together, they're going to, until they trust going out of the house again, going out on the town again, that's who they're going to be devoted to. We strongly think that after the pandemic, there's going to be a financial kind of reckoning where families have added subscription services. They've bought a lot of media for the home, game services, video services, and they may look at the bottom line as we come out of the pandemic and say, we're spending a lot more than we anticipated and we need to cut back. The things that have the most emotional resonance for them are the ones that are going to get kept. We're companies making us feel special at home. We have a term that we use that's fanatomy, that has to do with the tennis game between a company and its fans. I tell you my story, you say to me, yeah, but wouldn't it be great if this was part of the story? And now I have the choice of saying, no, that's not what I want to tell you. Or saying, that's a really interesting idea. Let's see if we can collaborate to work it in. If you give your audience a little control over the things that they engage with, they will become much deeper fans. And that's what you're probably seeing with kids with Minecraft, with Fortnite, with Roblox. Those are platforms that really open up and invite children and young people to have a say in their entertainment and in what they're building. And finally, this one may be controversial for the educators on the panel, but we think that when kids go back to school, EdTech has always been kind of focused on management in the classroom, helping teachers better manage their classrooms. We think when kids go back to school, there's already been a shift while they're at home to helping kids manage learning at distance and helping kids manage their own learning. And we think when they go back to the classroom, it's going to be very hard to get them to sit still for the sage on the stage model of teaching, and that they may well shift over to much more of a self-directed learning, team-based learning, group-based learning. This is a word you're going to hear a lot in 2021, metaverse. If you've seen Ready Player One, or if you've read the book, you already know what it means. It's an immersive world. Roblox is kind of as close as we have right now to the metaverse. And everybody out there in the media world, not just kids, less kids, I'd say, is talking about what we need to be part of the metaverse. And it's going to be this immersive world where you can do almost anything. You can shop, you can game, you can build, you can tell stories, you can be part of stories, you can socialize, you can communicate, all seamlessly, so that you never have to go out and say, okay, I'm going to go over to this platform, now I'm going to go to this, and I have to log into that one. It's all going to follow you. So it's going to include all the different things that audiences want once it gets there. It's not here yet, but I just want to warn you that you're going to start hearing that term more and more often. And then just to close out, we think kids are going to leave screens for a while. Once they're truly able to be out in the world playing with their friends, we think that they are going to be in what they're telling us, they are so eager for time with friends, physical time with friends, playing sport, being at the playground, that we think they're going to put the screens aside and go out and be with their friends. And that's great. Physical play, there is down on the corner and up on the server, but they're not the same. There is something about being down on the corner with your friends, being at the playground, being on a sports team that just cannot be replaced. And so we're looking forward to that moment. And we know they'll come back. We know that they won't abandon screens forever. They won't abandon media or technology forever. But we do see this moment where they will just have this joy in being together again. This is my contact information. I'm happy to share the slides with anyone who'd like to get in touch with me. And I am looking forward to your questions now.
And I am back to ask you the question. If you still have questions for David, you should put them in the Q&A, not the chat. We'll try to get to as many of these as possible. If you need to leave at 6 o'clock, because that's the amount of time you've blocked off feel free to go because all of this is going to be recorded. So we may go on just a little bit after 6 o'clock, but you'll be able to catch that later. David, thank you. And there's some really interesting questions here. I bet you could go on for an hour about each of them, but let's see what we can do. You mentioned at one point to look at the cause of why kids are immersing themselves in screens. And you mentioned that one possible cause could be depression. And one of the parents in the audience wants to know, especially about the tween age kid, how can a parent tell if the tween on the computer is as a retreat due to depression versus just kind of bored, nothing to do, can't see friends in person? How would you assess that if you were a parent?
Well, I guess I need to start from the disclaimer that I was a psychology major, but I'm not a psychologist. And so I'm loath to give too deep an answer to that, except to say that what we're looking for in kids' lives is balance. We're looking for that time with media doesn't become out of balance with their time playing with other things, whether it's playing with reading or studying or communicating with friends. So this is a place where content and context comes in as well. That if they're doing things that are primarily isolating, if they're watching videos rather than engaging in something that is more connected with friends or siblings, if they're retreating to themselves, then you start to look at what the root of the behavior is. I think we might say the same thing. I had the slide with the kid reading under the covers. We might say the same thing if a child just retreated to their bedroom and read for 8 hours a day, and didn't want to communicate with friends, didn't want to be out with the family, didn't want to go and play in the backyard. Then you start to, if one behavior of any kind starts to overtake the others, that's when you start to look at what the root causes may be.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Okay. Can you just throw out a couple of suggestions here of sites or platforms that you really like for 3 to 7-year-olds, so for the younger kids? I know you just play all day. What are some of your faves for that age?
I'm always terrible at this because one of the sad things about my job is that I don't get as much time to actually play with stuff as I'd like to. A lot of you with kids in that age group may already have experienced in preschool or in primary school Go Noodle. Go Noodle started life as videos in classrooms to get kids up and moving. So if you get to that point in the day where kids are getting really hinky and they just need to move, you put on a Go Noodle video and they get up and they dance, and kids were coming home and saying, we want to do this at home. And so Go Noodles built a couple of games where they use a tablet and your motion is captured by the tablet and influences the game. So you're popping bubbles by actually reaching around where you are, and you don't touch the screen. The screen is just watching you. So that's one example of something that I really like because it gets kids up and moving. It's a very physically active thing as entertainment. I'm trying to think of what else so many of I talked about the economic side of it, that I think we're going to get to a point where parents are going to look at their bottom lines. The trend in platforms right now is towards subscription. And I always worry that recommending subscription platforms can be a very expensive thing. And I also am always a little reluctant to recommend things because of the individual child, the content and context part, that, if a kid is into dinosaurs, then my recommending a site that's all about sports probably doesn't help them much.
This is a question that never would have occurred to me, but what a great one. After the events of January 6th that so many children saw on television, Do you find that there are different things that are worrying kids about that? And also, I'm curious myself about how you would relate that kind of viewing, something very disturbing even to adults, to what's going on in the world where we're all at home, the TV may be on. How are kids going to react to that?
We have not done any studies since January 6th, so I can't tell you that we have talked to kids and they have explicitly answered around that. But I can tell you in a sort of longer term perspective that often the biggest problem with violent events, with events that are sort of earth shaking and like that, is that they get replayed over and over. And kids below a certain age don't understand that this is a replay of something that's happened before. If you're below about the age of 7 or 8, you may be thinking that all this is happening over and over and over again.
Oh,
Kids
no.
also don't have a good sense of distance. So something that happens in Washington, where I live, is seen by a child in California, where you live, and they don't necessarily know that this is far away. And to some extent, what's going on here in the US is everywhere. It's not just far away. So avoiding news, trying not to watch news with kids around, I think is probably a good idea. We all have that habit of turning on the radio in the car sometimes to news, and kids pick up a lot more than we think. I will say one of my frustrations in the 35 years that I've been in children's media is that we have not done a better job in this country of news for children. The BBC has had news round every day. It's now going out to digital platforms, but for almost 50 years, it was on the BBC linear service every day. And it was on right before the adult news. And a lot of adults found that watching news round was much more informative because they presented it at a child's level than watching the adult news. Germany has daily news for kids. So many countries have some form of news for kids. NBC has just launched a news for kids on a streaming channel, but we've done a very poor job actually of helping kids be informed.
I will mention again that we have some more great questions coming in, and if you need to leave at 6, because that's when we thought we'd end, leave at 6. You'll be able to see this recorded. Here's a very practical question. This parent says, I've noticed that after looking at my iPhone screen for an extended time, my eyesight suffers. Are there related studies, or is there information regarding children and teens' increased use of screens and their eyesight?
I haven't seen it yet. I'm sure that those studies are coming. It's the only time that we have looked at eyesight was when we were studying kids in virtual reality, and whether it caused any problems for them to be immersed in a virtual setting. And we found that unless you had eyesight problems going in, you probably wouldn't have any problems in a VR setting. But I cannot say that I've seen anyone do the study yet of what the increased amount of time with screens has meant. I think we are, the longer this goes on, the more attention we're paying to the settings in which we are all studying, working, playing, and trying to create the most comfortable, most ergonomically proper settings for doing all these things. When we thought it was, okay, it's going to be a couple of weeks and then we'll be back to what we normally did, I'm not sure we paid as much attention as we are now.
I'm looking at 2 questions here, one of which is big picture and one of which is very little picture. I'll ask the little one first. A parent says, we had to block Roblox as our 10-year-old and her friends were opening over 13-year accounts, and we didn't know who she was chatting with. She also had multiple accounts, so we couldn't keep track of who she was friending. How are game companies addressing kids who are doing workarounds? And very connected is another attendee who's asked, how concerned should we be if our child wants to have online friends on Roblox, that she does not know in real life?
Great questions. And as I said, today's Data Privacy Day. This is another area where we really haven't succeeded yet. And this is the company that organized the webinar that I was on earlier today is a company called Privo. And one of the things that they are looking at right now is how we might create a single sign-on identity that would follow you. You know, I mentioned the metaverse, but even without that, that would follow you from place to place, so that any time you went into a different platform, a different game, it would know this is a child, and you know, this is not someone who should be going into the 13 plus areas of this. Because right now the incentive is on kids to not tell the truth about their age, because they don't want the walled garden, they want the full experience. And because there is no really well-designed means of age verification other than a credit card, or you know, forcing parents to log in with a credit card. The incentive is on kids to lie, or on parents to help their kids lie if they want their kids to be on the platform. I would say, did you say the age of the person who is wondering about friends now?
The parent of a 10-year-old. The 10-year-old and her friends opened accounts that were to be for over 13.
Over 13.
And
Yeah.
she was chatting with.
And I think Roblox, among all platforms, has probably been the most responsive in terms of trying to keep its platform safe and friendly and clean. But at the same time, there are reasons why we've set these, these ages have been set through COPPA and now in Europe GDPR as the kind of ages at which you're able to give your own consent. I would never want to encourage kids to be in a place where they are not supposed to be, to create accounts that are for a different age. And you know, at 10 and 13, it may not make as much of a difference. But when that identity thinks that you are 15 and starts feeding you things for 18 plus, which are much more adult, then it can equally become a problem.
Now, you just said something about there are agencies that set the age limits, not the companies themselves.
Well, the COPPA, Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, says that if you are collecting any personally identifiable information, PII, about a child, and that there's not time to go into all the different things that are PII right now, but it's quite extensive. If you are collecting any of that, then you need to have a parent's permission if the child is under 13. There are other sites where they've set 16 as the rule, but the law says under 13. You know, there's a bigger issue here that I think is worth raising, that the conversation about data and about how data is used has become very I don't want to say one-sided, but very shallow. Again, it's the kind of clickbait headlines that data is bad. Anyone who collects your data is bad. You are being mined for your data and you're not being paid for it. And I really think that if we stop and think about it, there are three different types of data. There are the things that you never want anyone to collect, and certainly not to keep, that there is no reason for anyone to ask you for in pretty much any situation that is personal to you, and they just don't need it. Then there's a second level where you want them to ask this information, but once you're done with that experience, it can be deleted at no loss to anyone. So if I am playing in a game and they need to know something about me, something personal about me to make the game experience better, I may be fine giving them that information, but I don't want them to keep it after I'm done. And then there's the third layer of data, which is data that is okay, you know, we want them to take and we want them to keep. So if I'm in a learning setting, if I am using educational technology and I want it to be able to grow, or my child is using educational technology, and I want it to be able to grow with them. I want it to understand where they're struggling, where they're succeeding. I want it to move them on to the next level when it's appropriate. I want it to know how old they are as a starting point and to comparison against benchmarks. Then I want them to be able to hold on to that data. I want them to treat it with respect. I don't want them selling it onward and such. But I think we have let the conversation about data become too superficial and really need to step back and have a deep thought about it at the regulatory level, at the corporate level, at the family level.
That's an interesting response, because remember I said the next question is a little bit more meta, and that feeds right in. One of our audience members wants to know, are you concerned about the metaverse? My first feeling was fear that this would bring a world where people would sit in front of a screen every day, all the time, going out less, moving less, physically meeting less. I don't know how you can answer that quickly, but maybe you can. Well, then we'll do maybe 3 more questions.
I am the classic definition of ambivalent about it, that I think there are many things that are going to be wonderful about the idea of a metaverse. I think it's going to be a while before we get there. There are things that I think will be wonderful. When I was growing up, the only people that I could play with were the people I could reach physically. You know, Brad next door, or my friends, you know, as I got older, my friends down the block or across, you know, when I could cross the street. And it really didn't matter if Brad was into baseball and I was into bicycling, because we were all we had. And there are great sides to that. It meant we had to negotiate. It meant we had to compromise at times. But there were also the sides that if I wanted someone to bike with and Brad didn't want to bike, then I was out of luck. In the metaverse, there is always going to be a community where you can find people who share your interests. And already with just the internet alone, we've found that kids, you know, the kid who is growing up gay in a small town where that's not, you know, where there's no one else that they know of, or no comfortable way for them to find out if there are other kids who feel the same way, who are the same, you know, who are also gay. They can find their community. So in terms of the metaverse being able to cut across cultures, to introduce us to people that we might never have a chance to meet, or to situations, or to go places that we might never otherwise have a chance to go, I think that's great. But I do think there, you know, to the extent that we allow ourselves to be immersed in it, we get back to the question that I was talking about before, was if it becomes exclusive of other things, if we find that we're not living real life, we're just living virtual life, then it becomes a problem.
What would you say to your kid if he or she is seeking emotional support, as in a remote teen romance, over the internet? You've been the parent of teens. I know you've been there.
I have been the parent of teens. It's been a while. Not so long. That's such a tough question. I mean, it depends on so many things. How did they meet? In what kind of setting did they actually first meet each other? How confident are you that this person that they're talking about is really who and what they say they are? What is the long-term goal? I mean, if this is somebody, is this somebody you would ever want to meet in real life, and how would that happen? Are they using that as a way of avoiding meeting people in real life, if we're ignoring COVID for the moment, or if we're saying that there are ways to at least be in safe spaces with other people? It's such a multi-dimensional question that it's very hard to answer.
And I'm sure, just as everything else you've said, it depends is the answer to so many of these questions. Another person who was in the audience asked, if you recommend any limits on screen time and what your view is on that. And I'm just going to guess that you're going to say it depends, and on so many of the factors you've talked about tonight.
Yeah, I don't recommend limits on screen time based on time. I recommend limits on screen time based on balance and based on the content and context that I've been talking about. I talked about addiction, and there's a pediatrician who doesn't use the term addiction, but talks about when things interfere with the rest of life, and that's the point where you have to intervene. Where if the kid can't come to the dinner table because they're so entrenched in what they're doing, then that becomes a family issue. So it's very hard to have limits on time, especially right now. To put limits on time, I'm amazed that more kids aren't putting aside the casual uses of media, because when they're going to school on Zoom, they must be just done with screens by the end of the school day. But it represents so many elements in their lives that are critical to them. It's their social life, it's their entertainment, it's their pursuit of their passions, that it's hard to tell them to put it down for that reason, just for the purpose of time.
You think you'll change your mind post-pandemic when kids are not learning remotely?
No, I still don't think I'll change my mind about screen time per se, about setting limits, because I felt the same way before the pandemic, that you need to look at what they're doing and why they're doing it, much more than just how much time they're spending doing it.
Okay, 2 more questions. One is, well, you could take an hour on this, I'm sure. But is there any relationship between violent games like Call of Duty, for example? I've never seen that one. To kids' mental health?
I am not the expert on this. I know a lot of the experts on this, and if I can kind of parrot what they will say, there has not been reliable data or substantive data that indicates a causal relationship between a child choosing violent media and becoming themselves violent or becoming aggressive. There are elements like the mean world syndrome, where if you are consuming violent media and you come to believe that this is what the world is like, you may have a more dystopian view of the world around you. So that may influence your outlook more than your actions. And then again, I go back to this question of why you choose something. I was at a conference back around the 2000 in Northern Ireland, and they took us to visit a teen center. And the teens were all playing these violent video games. And we were asking, well, wait a minute, you're living at the time in Northern Ireland in a fairly violent setting. Why are you choosing to play violent games? And essentially they were saying, this is catharsis. This is us in a safe environment being able to play out feelings of anger or feelings of violence without actually going out and committing violence. So the reasoning behind the choice of that is absolutely something for parents to have a conversation with their kids about. What is it that draws you to this? Are there things that would have less violence to them that would give you the same kind of emotional response that you have? I've been fascinated by Fortnite, because in Fortnite Battle Royale, you're actually it is a game where you're hunting people and killing people, but they've created it in kind of a cartoony form where it's not like playing Call of Duty. It's not like playing Grand Theft Auto, where they go for making the violence much more explicit. And parents seem to perceive, and kids as well, I think, seem to perceive the action in that as action and not so much as violence.
I said this would be the last question, but I lied, because a question just came in that I cannot resist asking you. My teenage son mixes homework time with play screen time, YouTube, gaming. Is that something we should stop? I figured that would be a quick one before our last question.
You know, this is sort of a do as I say, not as I do, I think, because I don't believe that you can effectively multitask and focus on your homework at the same time as you are texting and YouTubing and all that. The person didn't say whether the YouTubing was related to the homework. I'm going to assume for the moment it wasn't. That you know, doing research or you know, going out and looking for information online is one
I don't
thing.
think so. I think this is a parent of someone who in the middle of doing homework is also chatting, gaming.
I think that's one of those places where the restrictions on device use can be helpful in a couple different places. One is storing them outside the bedroom at night so that there's not that temptation to wake up and check and see if anyone's messaged you in the middle of the night. And in fact, that's a good family thing to do. I know a lot of families that have a device basket, and everybody's devices gets plugged into the recharger and put in the basket overnight, so nobody's tempted by that. Reducing distraction when you are trying to focus on schoolwork, I think is very valuable. It's really hard when your phone is dinging every 10 seconds with a new message coming in to gain any kind of focus or trajectory.
Okay, so this really is the last question, and it's a great way to end, and it's a two-part question. And before we conclude with it, I just want to say I'm super proud of you, my little brother. I really enjoyed listening to you tonight. What is the one piece of advice you would most like everybody to hear? And what gives you hope for the future?
So going to the first one, usually my answer to that goes back to what I said about guilt. Don't let anyone use guilt to help to make your decisions. But I think tonight I'm gonna use something different. I'm gonna say, play with your kids, watch with your kids, take advantage of this moment where we're all, not all, where so many of us are at home together. There's a wonderful book called The New Childhood by a guy named Jordan Shapiro. He may well have spoken to this group already. And Jordan talked about how much he hated some of the things his kids did with media until he started doing it with them. And he suddenly began to understand what the attraction was. And when they had that as a common ground, when they started talking about the game itself or watching a television program together and talking about that, it became he understood it a lot better and was much better able not only to say yes, but also to manage how, when, and why they used it. Before the pandemic, we were already seeing a lot of families watching TV together, and they're watching what my British colleagues call the shiny floor shows, like Dancing with the Stars and Masked Singer and things like that. They're watching the cooking shows and the baking shows. This is a great thing, the idea that families are sitting and watching together and talking about it. So take advantage of this time and spend time together. What gives me hope is, I said I don't get much time to play with the things and with games and apps and things like that, but I do get time to watch kids do things. And the thing that gives me the most hope is no matter how much we think about how we want to design something for them, they're going to play with it the way that they want to play with it. They are so creative and so, I'm not sure if the word is anachronistic, or I don't think that's the right word, but they invent for themselves. They are such, and they will show you how they want to play with something, how they want to engage with something, the story that they want to tell. We see these lovely things like kids who, if any of you are familiar with Toca Tea Party, it's a beautiful app from Toca Boca where you make your own tea party on the screen, and you can pour tea and you can serve food, and that kids go and they get their stuffed animals and they set them up around the tablet and they hold a tea party and they have all the conversations and that. They are such creative beings.
And that gives you hope. And thank you so much. And there's Charlene.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Alice, for an outstanding evening, and thank you all of you who stayed with us here until the very end. We could tell this is a really important topic, and you've asked so many good questions. We hope we got to most of them. Again, we will give David's very generously offered contact information. We have one viewer, for example, is herself deaf, David, and she wants to know how is technology impacted in a family like that. So interesting comments and questions. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Stay well, stay healthy. Take care.